got his next four years. He's going to be
Anything like that, I'm just going to...
He said he hasn't signed the contract yet.
Well,
No, because I don't have to start with
I know.
Man, I'm sure they could get somebody else.
because it's...
With her, you will.
who did it before?
The guy who did that. They brought back
Oh yeah, I know.
his name, but he's
Yeah,
an outcast member.
right. I know who you're talking about.
They
Yeah.
brought him back.
I got enough for you.
And then we'll go like
Good evening. Let's begin. I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's the regular City Council meeting of November 14th, 2016. The time is 7:30 p.m. Could we have a roll call?
Mayor Pro Tem Bliss.
Here.
Councilman Clark.
Present?
Councilman Corbett.
Here.
Councilman Gettings.
Here.
Councilwoman Scott. Here. Councilman Soltis.
Here.
And Mayor Harwell.
Yes, I'm here. Would you please rise if you're able for an invocation to be led by Councilman Soltis, and remain standing if you'd like for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Tonight I want to read a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. Courage is an inner resolution to go forward despite obstacles. Cowardice is submissive, surrendering to circumstances. Courage breeds creativity. Cowardice represses fear and is mastered by it. Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when we must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because it is right.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks. Please be seated. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? Are there any presentations tonight? Okay, we'll go to items A1, 2, and 3, which are business licenses initial and business licenses temporary and seasonal. What's the wish of City Council?
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Clark.
I'd make a motion to approve all business license, initial and temporary and seasonal. Number 1, car hunters, inventory and auto sales business at 530 West 11 Mile Road. That is a new business to the city. Party City 4110, a party goods store at 32351 John R. This is a change of location. Vision Works, a retail optical store at 361 West 14 Mile Road. This is all a new business also. Under temporary and seasonal is Poma Tree Farm, a Christmas tree lot at 246 East 11 Mile Road. And this is subject to compliance with all departmental and ordinance requirements.
Thank you, sir. Is there support?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Corbett?
Support.
Thank you. A motion made by Councilman Clark, seconded by Councilman Corbett, to approve all business licenses initial, temporary, and seasonal, which is Car Hunters Inventory, Party City 4110, Vision Works, and the Poma Tree Farm. That would be subject to compliance with all departmental requirements and ordinance requirements. Is there any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Were any of the applicants in the room? Is there any business owner that was just approved? I'll give you 30 seconds if you'd like to address us. You were approved. Congratulations. Come to the mic if you wanted to say something. It's not required, but you are welcome to speak.
Well, I am the district technical manager for Vision Works, and we just are very excited. We're new to Michigan. We've just been here a little over a year. This will be our 11th store in Michigan, and we hope to keep growing, and I'm just excited to be a part of Madison Heights.
Thank you, sir. Could you give me your name?
My name is James Gully, Gully.
Thank you, Mr. Gully. It's a pleasure to have you here. Next on the agenda is B1, public hearings. It's a special approval number 1607, the Hertz rental car facility. Mr. Myers?
Yes, Your Honor. Special approval is required under Section 10.3295 of the zoning ordinance to allow Hertz LLC to operate within the existing building at 314 East 14 Mile. The existing zoning is M1 light industrial and is currently the property is currently vacant. Hertz proposes to open a rental car facility in the existing building. Parking meets the minimum requirements of the zoning ordinance. The proposed hours of operation are Monday through Friday from 7:30 to 6 p.m. and Saturday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. The facility would be closed on Sunday. The Site Plan Review Committee has reviewed the site plan, and the committee recommends the following two conditions should City Council grant special approval. A, no vehicle repair except for detailing of rental vehicles, which is permitted through a previous special approval, and B, no parking of rental vehicles on Groveland.
Thank you. I'd like to open the public hearing. If anyone would like to address City Council on this specific subject, special approval number 1607, please come to the podium now. No one has risen. Last chance. All right, I'll close the public hearing for special approval 1607. What's the wish of City Council?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Corbett?
Sir, I move that the council grant special approval for the Hertz rental car facility at 314 East 14 Mile Road, and I would specifically incorporate in that motion the two recommended conditions involving no vehicle repairs and no parking on the side street, Groveland.
Thank you, sir. Is there support?
Your Honor,
Mr. Bliss?
I'll support.
Let's see. Thank you. After a public hearing, there was a motion made by Councilman Corbett, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Bliss, to grant special approval to Hertz rental car facility and incorporating the recommended conditions by staff regarding no vehicle repair and no parking on Groveland. Any discussion from council?
Mr. Mayor,
Ms. Scott, please.
if I could ask of the petitioners, I do have a question. If you could just explain to me a little bit more how this would proceed if somebody wants to rent a car. Would they come to your office, and would you have that car stored in the lot anywhere that I see in front of me on the blueprint?
Sir, I'm sorry. The mic, please. Thanks. It'd be helpful if you could give your name.
Larry Stavito, address or good?
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Larry Stavito. Typically what we do is have online reservations, and we reserve the cars, and we have two satellite locations, one in Rochester and one in Royal Oak, that we bring in the cars as on an on-need basis,
Okay.
and that's how we rent them out.
So the actual rentals, they would not be picking up at this facility, is that correct?
They would be picking them up from that facility and returning them, but it's not necessarily a storage lot. It's a satellite lot that's just expedites rental for the area.
Okay, that's what I didn't quite understand how that would work, but
Yeah.
I'm happy with that.
Okay.
All right.
Larry, could I ask you a question? What were some of the challenges or advantages of this location?
You know, Stevenson Highway has quite a few hotels. The visibility of the brand, I mean, it's just right there. 75's there. It's just a great location for it. You know, I can't speak. You know, Cheryl helped us out quite a bit to get this on the docket to make it to this agenda, and you know, just it works for us there. Yeah.
Good. Any other questions or comments from City Council? Sir, did you have any other input?
No.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
We'll go to vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Well, if I didn't say earlier, the motion carried on the business licenses. Okay, reports on agenda of interest to parties in the audience. All right, we'll go meeting open to the public. If anyone would like to address City Council on any subject, now is your opportunity. It's not required, but it'd be helpful if you give your name and address. Good evening.
Good evening. My name's Gloria Moore. I live at 27368 Dartmouth. Friends of the Madison Heights area senior citizens is having an ice cream kit raffle on our third Tuesday meeting on November 15th. That's tomorrow at 7 p.m. at Wilkinson Middle School. Everyone is welcome, and in order to be in the raffle, you submit the name, and we put it in the jar, and we pull the name out, and whoever's name is on it wins. And either they could pick it up right at the meeting, or let us know how to deliver it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Meeting's open to the public. Would anyone else like to address City Council? All right. We'll close that portion, and we'll go on to Communications C1. We have a financial audit presentation to be given by the city auditors. Mr. Myers?
Yes, Your Honor. Our city auditors, Plant Moran, is here to make a presentation regarding the audit of our annual financial statements for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2016. And following the presentation, we would recommend that council receive and file the auditor's report.
Thank you. Good evening. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Beth Bailey. I was the partner along with Joe Heffernan on your audit this year, and this is Keith Shemansky, who is the manager. We do have a slide presentation. I'm just going to give a couple of opening remarks here. Just as a starting point, you did have what's considered to be an unmodified opinion. That's our opinion that we're giving on your financial statements. Basically says they're fairly stated in all material respects, so that's the highest level of assurance that we can give. I'd also encourage you, if you have not had a chance to yet, to read the management discussion and analysis portion of your financial statement. It's towards the front on pages 3 through 11. Management obviously put that together, and it's a really good synopsis of the year, and also has some forward-looking thoughts in there as well. Most of the slides that Keith is going to cover are going to be focusing on the general fund. So that's your main discretionary fund. And this year, if you were to look at that compared to budget, you had budgeted to use some fund balance, but you actually ended up adding to fund balance. Keith's going to cover some of the specifics of how you added to fund balance. But in comparison to the budget, revenues came out better than expected in a few different areas. And then in addition, there were several departments that were under budget on their expenditures, so that's good news. Your major street and local street, which are major funds that you have, those both had a planned use of fund balance, basically due to some construction projects. There were no deficits in any of your funds. So again, we'll be focusing mainly on the general fund, but we always like to point out if you have deficits in any other funds. Also, in terms of additional good news, you are continuing to make investments in the overall community in roads, technology, vehicles, including public safety vehicles, DPS vehicles. You added over $5 million in terms of investment in the community for governmental assets, and then another $2 million in the water and sewer fund. Another positive indicator is really you have very little debt. If you look at your balance sheet, you've got just under $3 million for the fire station construction, and those bonds were actually refinanced this year to take advantage of some lower rates. And besides that debt, really all you have would be your Coon Drain debt and some debt for water meter reading system. So again, very low debt. Part of that is the reason why you have such a good bond rating. Really, the biggest challenge that you face is your legacy costs, and that's really going to be kind of a common theme across communities, especially in southeastern Michigan. So you've got your pension obligation as well as your retiree health care. So the pension systems have been around for a long time. You've been making your payments for a long time. The retiree health care is one of those items that is newer in terms of measuring that and trying to chip away at that liability. On the police and fire pension, which again covers about 200 participants, that system, the funding percentage has decreased from 60% to 52%, and that's really a combination of two things. One, the liability keeps increasing each year, but then there have been a couple years in a row where the stock market hasn't performed as well or even close to what the expected rate of return is, so you're seeing a drop in your assets as well. So that's part of the reason why you're seeing a decrease there. Likewise, on your MERS system, which again covers about 200 participants, including actives and retirees, that funding level has dropped from 66 to 58%. So your two pension systems together are unfunded by about $55 million. Now, you did issue pension bonds back in September for your general employees or your to cover the liability for the MERS system. So that one is pretty well shored up. The assets are in the system. Now you make the debt payment versus funding the unfunded portion of the pension system. And then on the retiree health care side, again, that's one where you have been able to put some money aside. I'd say that that is better than what we're seeing in a lot of communities. We have a lot of clients of ours that don't have any dollars put aside. So right now you do have about $24 million put aside, but you still have an unfunded obligation on the retiree health care side of about $57 million as well. So your unfunded on your pension is pretty similar to the unfunded on your retiree health care. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Keith. He's going to go through the slide presentation. If you have any questions while he's going through, feel free to interrupt us, and then I'll come back and very quickly go through the letter that's addressed to the mayor and council.
Thank you. Good evening. Rather than going through the 80-some page financial statement document, we've got just a handful of slides to go over some of the highlights. We are going to touch on a few different aspects of the financial statements, beginning with a few slides on the general fund, but also covering the full accrual retiree health care liability and some changes in accounting coming there, as well as touching on the water and sewer fund. So on slide number 1, we're looking at a 5-year history of general fund revenues. As is typical of most local units of government, property taxes are the largest revenue source for the general fund. They made up about 63% of 2016 revenues, which is up about $300,000 compared to the last 3 years, which was pretty much flat at about $16.4 million. Had this comparison gone back about 8 years or so to 2009, we would have seen the peak in property taxes to be over $22 million back in 2009. So you can see that we've sort of reset to a new normal of about $16 or $17 million following the recession of 2008 through 2010. Aside from the $300,000 increase in property taxes, there was also about $300,000 of increases spread across the other categories. So total increase of about $600,000 or $700,000, or just under 3% compared to 2015. On slide number 2, we've got a similar 5-year comparison for general fund expenditures. Again, as is typical, public safety is the largest category of expenditures, making up a little bit more than half of the total for the general fund. Total expenditures in the general fund did increase about $1.2 million compared to last year. The majority of that is driven by increased contributions to the retiree health care plans. The city made advanced funding contributions of $770,000 more than the advanced funding contributions they made in 2015. So that accounts for the majority of the increase, as well as some increases to pension funding. So that accounts for the about 5% increase in expenditures compared to the prior year. On slide number 3, we put those totals side by side with revenues represented by the orange bars, expenditures by the blue bars, and we can see that over the last 6 years, for all but one of those years, including 2016, the revenues have exceeded expenditures. That excess in 2016 was about $700,000, and that allowed for the fund balance of the general fund to increase by a similar amount. You can see by the fact that revenues have exceeded expenditures for the last several years that despite the significant decrease in property tax revenue compared to 2009, the years back then, the city was able to bring their expenditures in line with the new normal of $16 or $17 million. So that really is a credit to council and management, and as Joe would typically mention, likely a byproduct of the efforts you put into forecasting each year. So we credit the city with doing that. You can also see that the expenditures, or the fund balance compared to 1 year of expenditures, is about 32%. So you've got a few months in reserves, and that amount for each of the last several years has exceeded what the council has set as their target minimum fund balance. On slide number 4, we begin with a summary of net position from the financial statements. The first column is on the full accrual basis and includes both the governmental activities and the business type activities. So this is essentially all operations of the city, including the water and sewer fund and all of the governmental funds on a full accrual basis. And that means we're including both long-term assets and liabilities. So you can see, aside from a small amount of restricted net position, the two main categories are the net investment in capital assets. That's the book value of the infrastructure, vehicles, equipment, and other assets the city has, less any outstanding debt on those. And the unrestricted net position is essentially the residual after all that. 1 year ago, the city implemented GASB 68 related to pension accounting and was forced to place on the books the entire unfunded pension liability, and that's what caused the unrestricted net position to become negative a year ago. We can see that despite that, the total net position at the end of 2016 was just under $62 million. However, 2 years from now, for the year ended June 2018, GASB statement number 75 will become effective related to retiree health care accounting. That will do for the retiree health care accounting what GASB 68 did for the pension accounting a year ago. And by that I mean we'll be taking the entire unfunded liability of the two retiree health care plans and placing that on the same full accrual financial statements. As you can see, the net impact of that will be a reduction of the unrestricted net position of $54 million. That will significantly increase the deficit in unrestricted net position. However, the total will still remain positive. So although you can't take the net investment in capital assets and sell some water mains or some vehicles in order to fund your current operations, it does reflect the fact that on a full accrual basis, if you were to look at the entire cost of providing services, essentially from the beginning of the city's accounting until this date, you still have covered the cost of providing services with a surplus of $7.7 million. So while that will be a major change and will increase the unrestricted deficit, and for many communities take the total to be a negative number as well, you can see that there is a significant impact that this new accounting change will have 2 years from now. We'll continue to update these numbers and show you what that's going to look like as we get closer to that date. Finally, on slide number 5, we switch gears one more time to look at the water and sewer fund. Again, if we were to go back prior to 2011, back to about 2008 or 2009, we'd have seen that the water and sewer fund had very little cash on hand, and in fact at one point was borrowing cash from the general fund in order to fund its operations. Since then, the city's kept a close eye on the rates and the budget and forecasting, and was able to build up its surplus both on a cash basis and an accounting net position basis. So we can see that for 2016, operating revenues exceeded expenditures $13 million to about $10.5 million, further increasing both the cash balance and the equity position. So while the water and sewer fund remains in a very strong financial position at the moment, the city is planning to use some of that net position over the coming years. I believe the called usage is for $2.1 million in the fiscal year you're currently in, ending in June of 2017, and then for additional uses the following 2 years for the meter replacement program. So a credit to the city for building up the reserves and allowing you to have the flexibility to pay cash for those capital improvements going forward. Are there any questions on the graphs before I hand it back over to Beth?
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'd like to look at slide 3, and I want to go back a couple of years. Right in the middle, it shows 2013. Our expenditures were a little bit more than revenue. Was that when we rebuilt John R. Road? Does anyone remember what caused that?
There was a $2 million transfer to the major street fund that year, and that accounts for the majority of sort of the small spike in expenditures that year.
Oh, okay. And then, Ms. Bailey, I had a question for you. Your opening comments, you highlighted a lot of the positives, that revenues were better than expected, several departments were under budget. Instead of using fund balance, we actually added to fund balance. And then you reached a conclusion that also we have low debt, and therefore that supports our great bond rating. Are any of those variables more important than the other, in your opinion? for a solid bond rating?
Yeah, I think being able to maintain a solid fund balance is probably one of the key indicators that they're looking at. So stability in your fund balance. So you can see here from this graph that you have had a very positive trend going back. Again, in that dip in 13, as we just talked about, there was a reason for that. But you've been able to show that you've been able to stabilize and bring your spending in line with that new lower amount of revenue that you have. So you don't have what, some communities when bond rating agencies are looking, if they have what they're calling a structural deficit, where year after year they're spending down their fund balance, that's an obvious big negative indicator. You actually have a positive trend where you've been able to stabilize your fund balance. All the while you're making your contributions to the pension system, and you're also able to, in some years, squeak out some extra money to put towards the pension systems too. So that goes a long way. Having the low debt that you do is really a key. Having really solid budgeting processes and doing the projections that you do, so you're not just looking at things in a silo on a year-by-year basis. You're looking at things over the long run. That's really what the bond rating agencies are looking for. And I'd kind of take all of those things that you're doing and just wrap them all up and say that you have sound fiscal policies and you're being fiscally responsible because you're looking out more than just 1 year, making sure that you're able to maintain that appropriate level of fund balance.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please.
I got a few questions, if I could. So for the people at home, can you go over slide 2, the far right column, transfers out? In 13, it was 2.2 million, and then from 14, 15, 16, it was 0. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so that basically means that, so we talked about in 2013, the $2 million was basically for street construction. And I'm not exactly sure what the $300,000 is back in 2012. But the fact that you haven't had to make any further transfers out just means that your other funds don't need any sort of subsidy from the general fund. They're able to, with the revenue sources that they have, they're able to cover their costs, and you're not having to continually shore them up. So again, that's something that the rating agencies would look at as well. Are you having to subsidize a lot of the other funds, and you haven't had to? And I wouldn't even call the $2 million is more a one-time, planned expenditure. That's not really what I would consider to be subsidizing another fund. So.
My next question is, and I don't know if you can do this tonight or not, but I'm curious about the corporation personal property tax. Where does that fall in line with your report tonight?
So the corporate personal property tax, actually it would be on the first slide. It would just be in, I'm not sure if that's combined. Probably not. It's a separate line item. State sources? Okay. So what ended up happening was when the personal property tax reforms came into play and the manufacturing commercial entities no longer had to pay the personal property tax, so your property taxes would have started to decrease. It's a little bit offset because you've had some increases to sort of even that out, but then what happened was the state had set up a mechanism for you to be reimbursed, not 100%, but hopefully 80-90% of those foregone personal property taxes, so they're no longer being paid by the businesses, but the state has come up with an appropriation. They're using a carve-out of use tax dollars. They're also using money that they are getting from some of the corporations for this essential services assessment that's meant to somewhat replace that revenue source, and then they're distributing that money back out to you. So this year you would have received a payment in October of 2015, and then you would have received another payment towards the end of June, early part of July for personal property, and it's coming from the local community stabilization authority at the state of Michigan. So they're collecting all this, they're getting an appropriation from the state, and then they're giving that money back. And there's a lot of reporting that you're doing internally to sort of justify how much you should be getting out of that reimbursement mechanism. So you are down because of that, that, but not the full amount of what you've lost for personal property tax.
Would you happen to know those numbers that we got reimbursed, or?
I don't know. We could look that up. Yeah, $290,000, right. And then the payment cycle is you'll be getting checks, supposedly going to get checks every November.
All right, so my third question, in terms of the public safety being the top expenditure, do you know or happen to know how we rate with other cities that are comparable to us?
Yeah, I would say, obviously, public safety is the largest expenditure. It's
Sure.
typically 60 to 70% of the budget, so I'd say you're probably right around in that same neighborhood. You know, it's just a big part of what you do as a city is to provide those services, and so I think that that's right in line with what we're seeing pretty much everywhere. And that would include, you know, costs of pensions and so forth for those line items as well.
Would it include the actuaries that changed this year?
It would. When you say the actuaries that have changed,
Well, that's the increased, right, from life expectancy?
yes, yeah. So actually, that's part of the letter that I'm going to cover. It talks about the fact that there are certain numbers in your financial statements that are based on estimates, and really the biggest ones would be related to both your pension contributions, pension liability, as well as your retiree health care. So the actuaries put a bunch of assumptions into their models, and they come up with what your overall liability is, and then they give you a number that if you pay that on an annual basis, you'll get to where you need to be many years into the future when you need those dollars available to make those monthly benefit payments. And this year, the actuary, on the MERS side for sure, the actuary would have used new mortality tables. So when you update the mortality tables, I guess fortunately for all of us, they're showing that people are living longer. So that can have an adverse impact on your funding level of your legacy plans, because that means you're going to have, they're projecting you'll have more months of making payments to people after they retire because they're going to be living longer. So that increases the liability. The other thing that the actuaries took into consideration this past year was they reduced the investment earnings projection that they had. The MERS plan reduced their earnings projection by 1/4 point. And so that has an impact, because all of the money that you're going to need to make those monthly payments is either going to come from contributions from the city. You've got a Public Act 345 millage for the public safety portion. So it's either going to come from those dollars or it's going to come from investment earnings. So when the actuary figures there's going to be less in investment earnings, that means ultimately there's more money that has to come from the city pocket to make up for those lost investment earnings. So there were two things, the mortality going up and the investment earnings going down, that you'll see that will, over the long run, it'll increase your pension contributions, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Please.
Ma'am, under other cities for recreation and culture, I see we have a column here. Do you know where we might be sitting on average? It might be an unfair question.
Yeah, you know, it really varies all over the place. There are some communities that really don't spend a lot on recreation and culture. I'd say somewhere between 10 to maybe 15% of your overall expenditures is probably what we're most frequently seeing there. So I think you'd be about in that ballpark, a little less than 10. So yeah, 10, maybe 15 might be a little bit high. So
Would it be safe to assume that police and fire in most communities get a good chunk of the pie?
yes,
Thank you.
yeah, most definitely. Yep.
Any other council
Any other questions on the slides?
Mr. Mayor, I think you've got something you want to get back to, and then I'd like to then circle back once she's finished with the presentation.
Yeah, just really quickly. So we have this letter that's addressed to mayor and council, and this is our end of audit letter. And under the auditing guidelines, there are certain items that we need to communicate to you once we're finished with the audit. So the first few pages here are that sort of standard communication. There's really nothing to point out on pages, going through page 4 up at the top, we do talk about estimates, which we just talked about, the significant ones really being the pension and the retiree health care. And then over on page 6, we have a full-page discussion that basically dovetails in with the slide that we just saw that talks about that upcoming reporting change to put that retiree health care cost or liability on the balance sheet in a couple of years. And then on page 7, we just talk about revenue sharing. So after property taxes, state shared revenue is your largest source, second largest source of revenue. And we just have a chart here. Bottom line, this is just showing that that second largest revenue source for you really just went up by 1.3%. The revenue sharing, back in the day, you were getting 8% increases in revenue sharing, and then the state kind of hit its hard times and they pulled back a little bit on the part that was not constitutionally guaranteed. And so for many years in a row, you were seeing big decreases. Now they're at a point where they are putting some increases back in there, but it's really just on the constitutionally guaranteed piece of it. That's going up about 1.6% a year. And the part that's just appropriation from the state, that part's actually flat. So overall, you're going to see about a 1.3% increase. For you, you get about $2.8 million of state shared revenue. And then over on page 8, we just have a reminder that for Act 51, this is the gas and weight tax money that the city gets and puts into the major streets and the local street funds. There are all sorts of compliance requirements in that act, like you can't spend more than 10% of your money on administration. You have to charge equipment rates that are off of a published schedule that the state puts together. You have to have time cards to support the labor charges that are going to the major streets and the local streets. And up until this point, we've had to audit them from a financial statement standpoint, but starting with next year, we'll actually be required to do a compliance audit to make sure that you're complying with all of those provisions of the state act. That's never been required before. That's a new requirement that Michigan Department of Transportation came out with. We think it's an annual requirement, but they have not been very clear as to whether or not we're going to have to do that every year. And then at the bottom of page 8, the last item.
I'm sorry, could I interrupt you? What's the anticipated revenue from the gas tax?
I'm going to have Keith look that up real quick. Or not so quick. In total, $2.2 million.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you.
In total. Nope. So at the bottom of page 8, just a reminder on administrative charges. So it's pretty common practice to charge the other funds for services that the general fund may be providing, and just making sure that you're looking at the formula that you're using for that on a regular basis and updating that when necessary to make sure that those charges are fully documented each year. With that, any further questions?
Mr. Corbett? I'm sorry. You can, the floor is yours.
Thank you much. I have a few questions. I'd like to start and sort of at both ends of the budget. For a while now, equalization, Oakland County has been talking about a 1% increase of revenues.
Taxable value.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's held pretty steady for the past few months. I was wondering if you guys have any opinion on that? Are you in agreement generally with that projection, or what's your view on it?
Yeah, Oakland County, I'd say, does a really nice job. I think their model that they use to come up with those projections is pretty solid, so I feel pretty good about those numbers. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not a huge increase, but when you've got a built-up community, too, it's going to be harder to see big increases in the taxable value that equate to increased tax money for you. Because if your taxable value starts to go up too much, then you get into Headley where you have to roll your millage rate back. So it's really going to be difficult to see that property tax number go up by much more than inflation in any given year. And that's in a good year.
Okay. Sort of a general, maybe you can explain this better than I've been able to figure out. Whenever members of the public hear our discussion on the pension debt, well, I'm lumping that together with both the health benefits and the pension debt. Somewhere between the beginning of the explanation and when I start to glaze over, there's a moment of realization that the total indebtedness that we're being or will be required to report is going to be several times the size of our total budget. And so rather than trying to explain why we don't go screaming out of City Hall after Monday night, perhaps you might be able to talk about the time sensitivity of this. The bill does not come due the day after tomorrow. We've got people who are entitled to that program will still be working for a decade or two. Right.
So in total, when you add up all of your unfunded liabilities, it is in excess of $100 million between the two pension systems and the retiree health care. But what you have to keep in mind is that it's a long-term focus, so you're not expected to have that amount of money sitting in the funds today. What the actuary does is every year they tell you what dollars you have to put in. It's really two parts. One is every employee is earning one more year of service. So there's a value in earning one more year of service, the way your pension benefit calculation works. You know, if you've got an extra year of service, that equates to X additional dollars for you in your monthly pension check once you retire. So the actuary wants to see you fund that. It's called normal cost. It's everybody earning one more year of service. So that amount you are funding every year. And then they take the unfunded liability and they basically divide that over a number of years because they want to see you get to be fully funded over 25 or 30 years. I'm not exactly sure what your time frame is, but 30 years is the maximum. So you're going to pay the normal cost and you're going to pay some amortization of that unfunded liability. So the thought is that you get there over time. If your investments can outperform or even perform at your assumed rate of interest, that helps. If you have several years in a row where they get ahead, that helps too, because that's less money then that needs to come out of the city's pocket. But overall, I mean, it is a big, it's a big obligation. The retiree health care only started being measured, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Up until that point, nobody really knew what that promise was worth. And so now that it's been measured and you're doing things to address that, so you do have money that you've set aside, which is more than a lot of communities have been able to do. Because the unfortunate part about it was the first years that retiree health care obligation started to get measured were the same years that we were going into this market drop and into this recession. And so it was sort of like, yeah, you got this big liability, you should be funding that. Nobody had any money to be able to put aside for it. So the fact that you have been able to put some money aside, I'd say again is one of those indicators that you've really been fiscally responsible and putting what you can aside to try to address that. Because whatever you put aside today, that means less of a burden going forward.
Well, and on that point, now several months ago, the council issued $15 million approximately worth of pension bonds. Now, those bonds, as I understood the explanation at the time, were tailored for both the issuer and the purchaser in terms of taxable benefits,
right,
ability to issue on both sides of the equation. In terms of looking down the road on the remaining debt, are there any common bond solutions? I mean, could we issue a standard bond or would that be disadvantageous to the city? And I'm not looking for a grand solution tonight.
Yeah, well,
or in the short term.
There are all sorts of restrictions around issuing debt, and they change all the time. The state's always changing what your bond rating needs to be and things like that to allow you to levy for that. Now, you do have the 345 levy for the public safety. So that is a funding source to be able to make those payments for that pension system.
That's fully dedicated, isn't it? It's fully accounted for.
Correct.
And it's also, Your Honor, it's also at over 5.8 mils currently, which is almost as much as our operating.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's an as needed, and unfortunately, there's
It's
a
needed.
lot that's needed. Yeah, and then we really haven't seen much activity with bonding for the retiree health care costs at this point, and some of it is, I think. The pension contributions, and the pension is a constitutionally guaranteed item, I guess subject to some interpretation, but that's how most people would interpret that. The retiree health care is not, does not have that same sort of guarantee, and so I think there's been some reluctance to flip what right now is it's an obligation, but it's one that you can make changes to. You can make changes through bargaining and what have you to impact that liability. If you were to flip that over to a bond, and now you've got a fix, now you've basically taken something that's a little bit somewhat flexible and variable and turned it into a fixed obligation, which may, I think, decrease the chances of being able to make changes in that benefit going forward. So I think there's been some reluctance to do much in terms of bonding for retiree health care costs right now.
Well, what's the standard of practice right now among communities? I mean, we issued $15 million worth of pension bonding a few months ago, but what are they doing? And I mean, it's all proportional. I mean, I assume there are cities with bigger and lesser. Is it a holding pattern at the moment? And I might as well go to my last question, are we waiting for, given the festive season we're entering, are we waiting for, Santa Snyder and his friends to somehow fashion a grand solution here? What's the plan going forward in the short run?
Yeah, there are some communities that are struggling just to make their pension payments. You can't issue debt unless you have, I think it's a AA or better credit rating. Could be wrong there, but so there are a lot of communities. The communities that maybe could benefit the most from issuing the bonds don't qualify to issue the bonds, so they are sort of in a holding pattern. They're just trying to squeak by and make those pension payments every year. And the retiree health care, for the most part, what we're seeing is pay-as-you-go, where communities are paying the minimum, which is the actual premiums that come due for people that are already retired. They're not putting any money aside in a trust to pre-fund. And you do have $20-some million set aside in a trust already, so you've got a nice head start on that.
So I guess the answer is there is no answer at the moment for, okay.
Correct.
Your Honor, a couple things we're working on. Staff and I are working on a funding policy, which is actually part of the council's goal for retiree health care. We're going to be one of the leaders. We've tried to do research, and there, frankly, aren't a lot of them out there nationally, but we're trying to put something together that not only establishes some consistency in terms of our premium payments, but also protects the health of the trust and sets up a relationship between the two. In addition, we're going to be recommending a one-time lump sum additional contribution of $1.6 million for retiree health care based on our good fund balance situation, and of course subject to council's approval on that. So those things are coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council comments?
Mr. Mayor.
Please.
Ma'am, this is kind of off the wall question, but how many cities do you guys service, if I could ask?
How many does Plant Moran audit? We have over 500 governmental financial statements that we issue each year. Yeah.
Now, in any of those are there any, like Indian casinos or any kind of racetracks or any kind of gambling that comes into the cities that you do that provide revenue?
Yeah, actually, Keith and I both audit the city of Columbus, Ohio, and they have casino revenue tax. We also were recently hired as auditors for the city of Detroit, and they obviously have casino revenue tax, but we have not done their audit yet at this point, so.
So the revenue that comes in obviously isn't really from the gambling, it's more of like a service payment or a fee that is charged, or what exactly is that money that's coming in?
It is from the casinos themselves.
Okay. Now, is it like a standard fixed number, or is there a formula, or how do you decide, or how is that decided as to how much they pay each year?
I think it varies by state. So I know in Ohio it's a formula, so there's so much for, they keep track of where the casinos are and generating it, and then there's so much that's distributed out based on if you're in a county that has a casino, and then there's so much if you're the host city for the casino. So there's some elaborate formulas where it's not just the host city, it's the county also that's getting some of that. But I don't think that's the way that it works in Michigan. I think it's just for the city that the casino's in.
Thank you so much.
City Council?
Your Honor.
Please.
So most of my questions were asked. The only one that I have left remaining is the interest increase. It's the highest we've seen in 5 years by a lot. I just wanted to have an understanding. I assume it's just based on the increase in the market, but are there things that we can do to ensure that that interest revenue continues to go up, just based on what you know of our financial situation?
Yeah, I think that's just, Melissa may know more about why it went up as much as it did, but you're really governed by a state act for your idle funds, and it's pretty restrictive as to what you can invest in, so it's difficult to get, much more than, it's not like you say, well, we can get into the things that are a little bit more risky for a better return. It's pretty strict as to what you can do with
it. It just doubled, so that's what led me to the question. I mean, it's pretty much near double, and it's the highest in the last 5 years. So I just wanted to make sure that we might be able to continue that.
I'm sure they'll try. Rates are super, super, super low, so it's difficult to impact that too much.
Is there maybe on the staff side what led to that increase from 116,000 to 224,000 in interest this year? I mean, I'd love to give somebody a pat on the back.
Well, thank you. Since I do all the investing for the city, thank you. I actually do an investment report for council on a quarterly basis that kind of details out what we've been doing, but I'm very active of keeping the investments diversified. And also I try to do cash flow forecasting and keep our cash levels as low as possible. So, for example, when I started here in 2005, it was just standard practice in the office for the past finance directors to keep $4 or $5 million sitting idle in cash, and we do not do that anymore. We're normally down around $1.5 million. We also have money in the water and sewer fund that allows us to invest, and that wasn't true several years ago when I was having to loan money to the water and sewer department from the general fund. I couldn't make any money in interest because I didn't have anything to invest. So we do have that, and I'm very aggressive at staying on top of the investments. So.
Awesome. Thank you.
We'll do our best to make it go up in the future, but Beth is right. Interest rates are really low at this point.
It's just a really good jump, and if anybody from the public was watching like me, I mean, that's a pretty big jump, and definitely deserve that pat on the back. Because
thank you very much.
And hopefully we can continue it. I'll knock on some wood over here.
Thank you. Any more comments from City Council? Okay. Okay, thank you. Can
All
I
right.
pl-
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The presentation was well received. Can I please have a motion to receive and file the financial audit presentation from the city auditors?
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Corbett?
so moved.
Thank you. Is there support?
Mr. Mayor,
Ms. Scott?
support.
The motion's made by Councilman Corbett, seconded by Councilwoman Scott to receive and file the financial audit presentation from the city auditors for the year ending June 30th, 2016. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Next on the agenda are reports. We have two tonight. First is D1 regarding the renewal of the entertainment agreement with AMC Theater. Mr. Myers?
Yes, Your Honor. On November 1st, 2012, American Multi-Cinema, Inc., doing business as AMC Theater at 32289 John R., entered into an agreement for entertainment permit requiring a biannual review by the City Council. The owner has indicated the desire to have the agreement continue on the same terms and conditions. The Police Department and City Attorney's Office have reviewed the agreement for entertainment permit and have no objection to the continuation in accordance with its terms. If Council concurs, the appropriate action would be to continue with the agreement for an additional 2 years, subject to the same terms and conditions, including but not limited to the next review, which shall take place on or about November 1st, 2018.
Thank you. What's the wish of City Council?
Mr. Mayor,
Ms. Scott?
I move to continue with the agreement for an additional 2 years, subject to the same terms and conditions, including but not limited to the next review, which will take place on or about November 1st, 2018.
Thank you. Is there support?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Bliss?
Support.
Thank you. Any discussion on this item? All right, motion was made by Councilwoman Scott, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Bliss. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Next is report D2 regarding the CDBG application.
Oakland County has advised the city that our allocation of Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, funding for fiscal year 2017 will be approximately $110,282. This amount could change depending upon future actions taken by the Department of Housing and Urban Development prior to the actual receipt of funds in the summer and fall of 2017. Pursuant to federal guidelines, a public hearing was held on November 9th for the purpose of receiving public input regarding the past performance of CDBG funding and the eligible activities to be included in the fiscal 2017 application. The review committee met on November 9th to review the proposed application and recommended approval of the following CDBG activities: code enforcement for $87,500 and public services or yard services for $22,782 for a total of $110,282. Council's been provided with a Community Development Block Grant summary, which outlines this year's proposed allocation of funds and provides a comparison with the previous 2 years. This year's allocation is proposed to increase the public services yard services expenditures, reflecting recent increases in the cost for both lawn mowing and snow removal for low to moderate income seniors. This increase would cover only anticipated service costs at the existing client service levels and not an expansion of services to new participants. The proposed reduction in code enforcement expenditures will not result in a decrease in services, but as with previous years, one full-time code enforcement officer position is funded by the proposed allocation, and that's supplemented as needed by allowable previous program year funds. And just as a reminder, home improvement loans are administered now by Oakland County. Staff and I concur with the recommendation of the CDBG Review Committee and recommend the Council approve the fiscal 2017 application as proposed. If Council concurs, the appropriate action would be to adopt the resolution authorizing the Mayor and City Clerk to sign the fiscal year 2017 application on behalf of the City.
Thank you. What's the wish of City Council?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Corbett?
Sir, I move that the Council concur with the recommendation of staff with respect to the CDBG Review Committee budget and application as proposed, and authorize the mayor and clerk to sign on behalf of the community.
Thank you, sir. Is there support?
Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Scott?
Second.
Thank you. Motion made by Councilman Corbett, seconded by Councilwoman Scott to concur with the recommendation of staff regarding the CDBG Review Committee's application and authorizing the mayor and clerk to sign on behalf of the city. Is there any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. We'll skip ahead to item G, ordinances. We have two for review tonight. First is ordinance number 2117. Mr. Myers?
Yes, Your Honor. Presented for second reading is a proposed ordinance regarding leaving a child unattended in a motor vehicle. As council will recall from the first reading on October 24th, this proposed ordinance mirrors state law which defines a child as an individual less than 6 years of age. Council has requested possible alternative language that would include children over the age of 6 in the definition of child. However, absent legislative history or cases interpreting the state law with regard to the age provision, we are unfortunately left with the general legal principle that the city cannot prohibit something that is permitted by state law. Therefore, because the state law defines a child as an individual less than 6 years of age, if council were to adopt an ordinance defining a child to include an individual of 6 or more years of age, then the city attorney's office has opined that our ordinance would likely be preempted by state law and held unenforceable. Accordingly, the city attorney's office, staff, and I recommend that council adopt a proposed ordinance on the second and final reading.
Thank you. What's the wish of council?
Your Honor.
Mr. Bliss?
I move that we adopt ordinance 2117 as written on second reading.
Thank you. Is there support?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Gettings?
Support.
Motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Bliss, seconded by Councilman Gettings to adopt ordinance 2117 as written on second reading. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Next ordinance for review is number 2115. Mr. Myers.
On October 24th, council approved on first reading ordinance 2115 to provide an administrative approval process for issuing all business licenses in the city based upon council's adopted 2016-17 city goal to streamline the current approval process for business license applications by providing for an administrative approval which removes the burden of evening meeting attendance for owners. As requested by council, a second option is presented, which would retain the council's oversight authority but allow for administrative approval of temporary and seasonal business licenses only. So council basically has three options tonight. First, council could choose to do nothing, which would maintain the status quo in the current process for approval of all business licenses in the city. Second, council could adopt the originally proposed amendment that would streamline the current approval process for business license applications by providing for an administrative approval of all business licenses as outlined in the city goal. And third, council could adopt the second proposed amendment that would retain council's approval for all regular business licenses but provide for an administrative approval for temporary and seasonal business licenses only. Staff, the city attorney's office, and I would recommend adoption of the originally proposed ordinance amendment on the second reading.
Thank you. What's the wish of City Council?
Mr. Mayor?
Mrs. Scott.
I move for adoption of the originally proposed ordinance amendment on the second and final reading, but I would also like to, in addition to this, request a monthly report from the staff to our informationals, providing us the actions taken for that preceding month.
Thank you. Is there support?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Gettings?
Support.
I'll restate the motion. Made by Councilwoman Scott, seconded by Councilman Gettings. The motion is to approve on second and final reading ordinance 2115 and request monthly reports from staff regarding actions taken. Any discussion on this item?
Mr. Mayor?
Ms. Scott?
I discussed this with the staff because I was very concerned about businesses not being here because like the young man that was here tonight, it made an impression on him that he got to meet all of us and we got to meet him, vice versa. Businesses come to our city with good intentions, and I think that the majority of them have that, and we are approving them. Everything will still be reviewed by all the departments in the city. So, but I think I would not like to be left out of the loop. I would like to be aware of what the council is the businesses that are coming into the city, their owners, where they're located, et cetera. So I feel that if we are not given our monthly report, that it could slip by us. And I think that businesses are very important in the city. So that's why I suggested that, and that's why I added that.
Thank you. Other discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
Please.
Yeah, I know there's a rule, like you have to have an opinion on everything. I think it comes with the political thing. I'll be honest with you, I've gone back and forth on this 4 times, and now I'm about to contradict myself for the 5th time. So I understand what Councilwoman Scott's trying to do. I feel that wanting to keep your finger on the pulse. But if there was anything in the monthly report you didn't like, oh well. The opportunity to do anything about it just went by. It's already been presumably approved already. I appreciate the Attorney's Office recommendation for the second option, which was the one about keeping control over temporary and seasonal are exactly where the trouble usually pops up. We remember some examples, but I can tell you from the years on the zoning board, those temporary and short-term permits are where you get troubles. That's where somebody's throwing up a tent in a parking lot where it hasn't been there before, and putting in fireworks or fireworks sales or whatever they're going to do. And that certainly doesn't go over well with the neighborhood sometimes. So to be real honest with you, although I'm not strongly motivated, I'm probably going to vote no, only because my real option would be to just leave it as it is for now and let the thing sort itself out over time. Like I said, and I'm not a big fan of marching people in here, and I get it. If you got a one-man or woman store, that's a burden to have to come in here and take time out. But, we've seen other cases where people have done it. Maybe we can talk about on renewals, letting it pass. I'm just not comfortable that I've heard the solution yet with respect to my colleagues. I just haven't heard the one yet that rings a bell. So for myself, I prefer the leave it alone option, although that's not exactly something you vote on. I guess you eliminate all other possibilities and then you're left with that. So that's where I'll be going tonight.
Right. I'm also torn. I share that same conflicted opinion between balancing the interest of, businesses that want to move here or grow here compared to our oversight. I am satisfied that each business goes through the rigorous review by each department. I like to joke, it's pretty much every department except the library gets to sign off on our new businesses. And I know it's anecdotal, but one of the businesses we approved tonight, the eyeglasses store, wanted to open before the city council meeting tonight, and they were frustrated, so they missed a week of business. They're in retail sales. I think it's Vision Works, a retail optical store. And I blame them because they weren't aware of the timing for our licensing procedure. But this would be an example where a business may not have to forego a week of revenue just for council to approve or deny. And that happens infrequently, but frequently enough for me to say, well, let's get out of the way. But yeah, I don't feel too strongly either way. I'll probably vote yes, but I don't know. Any other council comments?
Your Honor.
Yes.
So I kind of agree with Councilman Corbett. I think Councilwoman Scott's request on the monthly report is a good one, because even though we couldn't do something about something that was in that report, we could amend the ordinance again because something was missed. But I think the reason that I'm voting no is not so much that I don't think that we can streamline this process, and that I don't think that we should, because I do. I think business owners shouldn't have to come here. They shouldn't have to wait. But I don't think that this is the right solution. I don't think we've had enough time to vet it. We requested changes, and what we basically got was an option that would only approve temporary seasonal. And so I think that there has to be a way, if we spend a little bit of time looking into it, where we can retain our ability as, essentially veto power, where this authority that the citizens granted us through putting us up here to make this decision, because this was a decision we were making when they voted for us to make it. And instead of shifting that authority in permanent to the staff through this ordinance, I have to believe that there is a way that we can maintain this authority and defer it to the staff on temporary bases while still giving us the ability to make those decisions. And maybe there isn't, but at this time, I'd rather do nothing than to give away our authority permanently without having to go through 2 ordinance revisions, two readings on an ordinance and spend another month getting our authority back. So I'd rather do nothing now and then look into it deeper, spend a little bit more time on streamlining this the right way. But if my colleagues would like to move forward, I think that the monthly review is at least a good step to where we could revisit it. The only thing is it would be 2 months then for us to get that authority back from the time that the decision was made that we maybe didn't agree with or wanted more information on. That's it, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments from council? I'll repeat the motion. It was made by Councilwoman Scott, seconded by Councilman Gettings, to approve on second reading the originally proposed amendment, ordinance number 2115, and additionally to request monthly reports from staff on actions taken. Last chance. Any further discussion? Let's do a roll call vote, please.
Okay.
Ms. Clark.
That's Councilman Gettings.
Yes.
Councilwoman Scott.
Yes.
Councilman Soltis.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Bliss.
No.
Councilman Clark.
Yes.
Councilman Corbett.
No.
And Mayor Hartwell.
I vote yes. 5-2, motion carries. We'll skip along on the agenda to minutes. Can I please have a motion regarding the special council meeting?
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Corbett?
I move that the council approve the special meeting minutes from October 24th, 2016 as printed.
Thank you, sir. Is there support?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Soltis?
Support, please.
Motion to adopt the minutes as printed from the special meeting of 10/24/16. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Can I please have a motion for the minutes from the regular meeting?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Corbett?
Sir, I move that we approve the regular meeting minutes from October 24, 2016 as printed.
Thank you. Is there support?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Soltis?
Support.
Thank you, sir. The motion is to adopt as printed the minutes from the regular meeting of 10/24/16. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Are there any nominations to boards and commissions? I see we have several willing candidates on the Charter Amendment Committee.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Corbett?
Sir, I move to reappoint James Smith, Christian Tecker, and Martha Kehoe to terms on the Charter Amendment and Ordinance Committee, terms that will run until the 19th? Yeah, 19th, yeah. 1/19/19.
Thank you. Is there support for the nominations?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Gettings?
Support.
Councilman Corbett made the nomination, supported by Councilman Gettings, to reappoint James Smith, Christian Tecker, and Martha Kehoe to a 2-year term on the Charter Amendment Committee, a term to expire January 2019. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. All 3 have been appointed. Congratulations. Any other nominations?
Your Honor,
Mr. Bliss?
we've got 4 for the tax board of review.
Yes, sir.
Donald Bessler, Barbara Castle, Steve Howcroft, and Mark Kimball. I move that we appoint all 4 of them to terms that expire 1/1/2019.
Thank you, sir. Is there support?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Corbett?
Support.
Thank you. Nominations were made by Mayor Pro Tem Bliss, seconded by Councilman Corbett, to reappoint to the Tax Board of Review the following 4 people: Donald Bessler, Barbara Castle, Steve Howcroft, and Mark Kimball, all for 2-year terms expiring January 2019. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Gettings, we'll
Could I
cancel that.
abstain? I didn't mean to jump in there. Could I abstain on this?
Would you like to abstain from all, or one in particular, or?
Barbara Castle, please.
Okay, do we need to be any more specific on that, or?
Yeah, would you, Your Honor, Councilman, would you state that reason for the record for your abstention, please?
Reason?
Yeah.
That's required. She's a blood relative.
Okay, so,
Just want to take that separate. I can amend my motion.
amend the motion to, okay.
That one.
All right, so the first vote will be on nominating Donald Bessler, Steve Howcroft, and Mark Kimball, those 3 to 2-year terms expiring January 2019.
Support concurs, sir.
Yeah, support agrees. So all in favor of those 3, that's Bessler, Howcroft, Kimball, to 2-year terms, signify now by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motions carry. They're all appointed. And next is a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Bliss, seconded by Councilman Corbett, to appoint Barbara Castle to a 2-year term to the Tax Board to expire in 2019. I'll recognize the abstention by Councilman Gettings, but any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. And the abstention by Councilman Gettings. Motion carries. She's appointed. Congratulations. Any other appointments? Nominations? All right, there's no executive session tonight, so before we adjourn, are there any closing comments from council? I'll begin with Mr. Corbett.
Just a couple of quick items, just before the council meets the way the calendar falls this year. We will be having Thanksgiving and more importantly, the Goodfellows will be out on the Saturday after Thanksgiving and on street corners around the community. If anybody would be interested in volunteering, a couple of hours. I believe it's 9 o'clock. We'll be departing from the Venetian Club, going until about 2 o'clock. We'll be working in teams of 2 or 4, depending on how many people we have. The Venetian Club is very generous. They provide breakfast and coffee to get us out the door and a light lunch when we come back. And help is always needed. The more bodies that can be provided, preferably those agile, younger folks with good vision. It's normally a requirement dodging in and out of the traffic. That who can help out would be very much appreciated. And then 2 weeks from tonight, of course, we'll be being visited by a certain elf from the North Pole, and we'll have our tree lighting ceremony here. And the Goodfellows will also have a can drive that evening. If you have any canned goods you can donate to help others alleviate discomfort during the holiday season. Happy Thanksgiving to all, and to all a good night for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bliss?
Yes, Your Honor. Just a couple of quick things. First, the audit report from Plant Moran. I kind of see that as our grade for the year. I mean, that is the mark of how well we as a city, administration, staff, us on council, how well we are navigating this really difficult financial terrain that the city is in. I mean, it hasn't been easy times since back when it was easy times, back in the early 2000s when there was a lot of revenue pouring in and you didn't have as many unfunded liabilities. We're trying to avoid grenades with every single dollar that we try to allocate and spend. And so I just wanted to congratulate my peers and especially staff for their hard work on being able to navigate that difficult terrain in such a way that our fund balance is growing. We're seeing revenue increasing. We're putting money away for unfunded liabilities. I mean, there's so much positive that you'll never hear about in the news or in just your day-to-day life, and especially not on Facebook. But this report gave our city very high marks, which is why we have such a high bond rating. And I just want to commend everybody involved, because it takes a lot to have that kind of success. Many of our peers in other communities don't. And so being able to increase the amount that we're able to spend on things like public safety, we were able to increase that. And so as we do that, it has a direct reflection on the safety and comfort of our citizens. And so just high marks to everybody around. And the second thing that I wanted to say, I know our mayor is a little too humble to say, so I wanted to give him some credit. I was out of town, but I saw on Facebook that he was out there raking leaves with a bunch of high schoolers, I think mostly from Lanford High School, raking leaves at the homes of senior citizens who were unable to do so. And I just wanted to give you some credit, some props for doing that, because honestly, there are so many seniors in our community who have a difficult time doing that, and being able to get some of those really able-bodied, tired not easily high schoolers to come out and do that, it's just impressive, and I want to congratulate you for putting that together.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Giddings?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to go along the same lines as Councilman Bliss. We have a great finance department. We have a great city staff overall. I'm proud to sit on this council because you guys make our job usually a piece of cake, not every time, but thanks to everybody involved in the finance report and all the good work you do every day. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Gruchowski?
Nothing. Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Myers?
Just a couple things, Your Honor, in addition to recognizing the finance staff for all their work on the audit, another great audit. I also want to recognize Linda Williams, our Economic Development and Community Engagement Supervisor, for our E-Cities 5-star award. I know there's been some press on this recently, and our reporter from C&G is here. Thank you, Mr. Kozlowski. To be recognized as an E-Cities city, and this is from U of M Dearborn's iLabs project, to be recognized as a 4 or 5-star community every year since 2010, as well as a best practices community for 3 consecutive years in 2013, 2014, and 2015, says something about our commitment to economic development and our maintaining relationships with the business community, and how well we as a city value entrepreneurship and success in Madison Heights. So thank you for that, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Ms. Prince?
Yes, thank you. I just want to thank all of our election workers and student election workers that were working in the trenches on Election Day for helping to facilitate a successful administration of the November 8th presidential election. I also want to thank the city's Department of Public Services, the police and fire departments, and staff, as well as the clerk's office staff, for their assistance in helping to make sure the day went as smoothly as possible for the citizens of Madison Heights. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clark?
A couple things. On Wednesday, November 9th, the Senior Center hosted the Veterans Day program. The program was a great success, and I know that all the veterans that attended felt very proud to be honored in such a special way. The staff at the Senior Center is so grateful to be able to organize and host this event, which brings together so many people to honor our veterans. Now, I have something here, I've still got to do some paperwork on it, but it's a proclamation that the city of Madison Heights become a Purple Heart city. Councilman Soltis, with support from Councilman Clark, have requested that council approve the attached proclamation honoring our Purple Heart veterans and declaring Madison Heights as a Purple Heart City. And I do believe we're going to vote on this November 28th. And I've got to find out just where we have to go to receive the paperwork saying we are a Purple Heart City, and I believe it's in Fraser. But what we are looking for is somebody from our city that is a recipient of the Purple Heart. We would like them to go there and receive the paperwork declaring our city a Purple Heart City. So if anyone is interested, please call City Hall, and we can make the arrangements. In fact, I will drive them there, if need be, to get the paperwork declaring that we are a Purple Heart City. The only other thing, I received a email. Dear Mr. Clark, you have no idea how disheartened I was by your constant use of the male pronoun when announcing the Veterans Day event in Madison Heights. There are 1,709 veterans in Madison Heights. 10% are women. Please apologize to the 171 women in Madison Heights that did not get an invite to the veteran ceremony. Now, I do believe when the invitation I said was for veterans. I used the male pronoun on what the procedure at the ceremony was for, and I apologize to the 171 female veterans of the city. I have great respect for them, just as much as I have for the male veterans. Also, the ending was, if you can't represent all of the people, it is time for you to stop running for city council. They might be right. I don't know. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I don't agree with that. I think you continue to run. You have every right to do that. I am a woman, so I can say that sometimes being politically correct can get to the extremes, and I know in your heart you meant every human being, no matter what gender. I would like to thank all the citizens of Madison Heights for coming to the polls and or voting absentee in the last week's election. I was amazed to see that, and first of all, I want to thank our city clerk for all the excellent records she kept on this and all the statistics that we were provided with. But I would like to congratulate 63.82% of our citizens that voted, which is a huge amount more, because we usually have 10%, maybe if we're lucky. And so I congratulate all 12,859 people that voted. This also includes 3,164 absentees, so I appreciate their time as well for marking their ballots and distributing them. And based on the election, I would like to congratulate our council commissioner, that's Gary McGilvery, who retained his seat in the district, the 20th district. He was elected to another 2-year term. And I'd also like to applaud the people who ran for school boards. That would be incumbent Christian Cole, who was reelected, incumbent Bill Pittman, newcomer Mark Kimball, and incumbent Donald Beck for the Madison School District. And also with the Lanphier schools, we had 2 unopposed candidates, Anthony Austin and incumbent Paul Cavanaugh. And I would like, if it's possible, if you could verify if there was a write-in and if they were awarded the seat.
Thank you, Councilwoman. There was a write-in, Ryan McCann, for the Lampier. He did receive many votes for that position. However, when we do the results at the end of the night, those votes are unofficial until the canvass is conducted, and our city has not been canvassed yet. So it's looking good, but I can't confirm.
All right, well, that's good, and I'm sure that we will announce it when it goes through. I also wanted to remind people that 2 weeks from tonight, in our next council meeting, is the Christmas celebration, the holiday celebration out in the front of City Hall. We will be entertained also by the Page Middle School Band and their choir, I would think. And I would like everybody to please come. Remember, it's at 6:30, so come an hour earlier. And I think you can find all the details on our city website. And I also want to announce there is going to be a fundraiser held by Goodfellows, and this is for their project, their 14th annual, which is No Child Without a Christmas fundraiser. It will be Thanksgiving weekend, which is Saturday, November 26th. And that will start at 3 o'clock for the children that want to come and greet Santa. There'll be dessert and hot chocolate for them as well, and a picture with Santa. And from 5 to 9, there will be a spaghetti dinner for all adults that you can come to, and that's a $10 donation. So that will be held at Augie's Bar and Grill, which is at 31660 John R. at Augie's Bar and Grill, and that's Saturday, November 26th. Also, I wanted to again thank our mayor and all who have participated in our last weekend's raking for seniors and the physically challenged. I know they were a brilliant help to them, and I want to thank the students from Lampier. If there are any from Madison too, or Foley, that would be great. I also want to thank the Madison Heights Madison Heights Community Coalition and all the people that participated, being our mayor and our fire chief, Jim Martin, who did the driving, and all the parents and the grandparents who encouraged their children to participate in the event. And I applaud them all. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Soltis?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to use my time to speak about the presidential election. I feel compelled, although as a nonpartisan public official, to give my opinion on this matter. There's a reporter from Slate magazine, his name is Jamel Boyer, who wrote a few articles post-presidential election that focus on race. I happen to agree with him. His one title is White One. We are all still the country that produced George Wallace. We are still the country that killed Emmett Till. That title alone signifies his opinion, again, which I also agree. It's a tough pill to swallow, for sure, but an accurate one. For those who don't know, and I'm embarrassed that I am one that didn't know either, Emmett Lewis Till was an African-American teenager boy who was brutally lynched in Mississippi August 25th, 1955, at the age of 14. That was only 60 years ago. George Wallace, in 1963, was a newly elected Alabama governor who, in his infamous and pathetic inaugural speech, said, "Let us rise to the call of freedom-loving blood that's in us and send our answer to the tyranny that clanks its chains upon the South. In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw a line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny. And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever." Much different than Abraham Lincoln 1863 speech, ironically 100 years prior to Wallace. Wallace's tone was completely filled with hate and contempt as opposed to equality. Sadly, Wallace's echoes from the past sound very familiar today and the election. By the way, Wallace was the one that stood in that doorway, built the wall, and didn't let the African-American students in, and Kennedy had to call the National Guard in. So when I took my sons to Washington, D.C. this summer, I made it a point to visit two places: the new Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial and the Holocaust Memorial. Both were spectacular, and both had heartfelt quotes that I found very pertinent and poignant and have tried to follow as my personal mantra. First is from a Lutheran minister during the Nazi regime who said, First they came for socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. He was arrested by the Nazis for uprising. And then one of my favorite quotes inscribed on an MLK wall that states, "Make a career of humanity, and you will make a greater person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in." Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for all the comments. Right, this is a nonpartisan body, but we do have personal opinions sometimes. And although Donald J. Trump may not have been all of our candidates, he will be our president. And him and the Republican Party will have control for at least 2 years in Washington, D.C. and in the state of Michigan. And so, as leaders of a city, I hope we can remind our leaders in Lansing and Washington, D.C. that there are more of us than them, and that cities and local schools really do matter, that we need help with infrastructure, not $1 billion to pave a freeway up to the middle of nowhere, but maybe $1 billion to help the urban core and entering suburbs. Our schools need help. Our higher education needs help. Our seniors, especially in Madison Heights, need help. I was reminded of the hope and the dreams of our children as we were going neighborhood by neighborhood, raking the homes of seniors living in extreme poverty. The Community Coalition organized this. And we'd knock on the door, and at first the seniors would be terrified by our group of young men pounding on our door. But then they would realize that these young people just wanted to help them. It wasn't a government action, it was just neighbors being kind to each other. And I know this kindness has a great ripple effect. I've already heard, scout groups are going out raking. So there's hope in that we individually can make this place a little bit better through our actions and deeds. About 9 months ago, changing subjects, about 9 months ago, the City Council invited DTE Energy in, and we asked a lot of questions on why we have a higher frequency of power outages. I know this is about the time of year that they said they would have accomplished some of their goals on providing more efficient electricity delivery in our city. So I would like a report. Maybe it's already in the works, but if we could ask DTE what they've accomplished throughout this year, especially with the tree removal and trimming program, any updates to equipment and other policy updates that may have impacted Madison Heights. No rush, but just ask DTE. Just tell them that we're still paying attention. And that's it. Is there any other business before City Council tonight? Hearing none, the meeting's adjourned. Good night.